I'm now pleased to welcome Divyank Turakhia, founder of Media.net, and Damian Bradfield, Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of WeTransfer and WePresent, and Ali Al-Mur to share their thoughts and insights and forecasts for the year ahead and what governments, entrepreneurs and investors need to prioritize. We'll also be tapping on how the future of investment is going to change.
Thank you very much to the World Government Summit and Reem in particular. 2020 completely changed the world as we know it. Our entire understanding of the world has turned upside down. People stopped going to the office. Kids stopped going to school. Usually, when changes and transitions like these come about, there are months or even years of preparations that take place. However, COVID made us do it almost overnight. Obviously, there were hiccups, but people came to grips with the new normal. We learned to work over Zoom, Team, and embrace new ways of working and collaborating together without actually being together. Despite what one may infer from certain global stock markets over the past 12 months, many sectors have experienced a downturn, unlike any time since the Great Depression at the beginning of the 20th century. With so much uncertainty, many people have been less likely to risk money and capital on investing in startups and business, especially if they did not see the short-term upside. Today, we want to discuss what kind of impact 2020 will have on the future of entrepreneurship and how business owners can harness new opportunities to start or restart their operations. We are joined here today by Divyank Turakhia, founder of Media.net, and Damian Bradfield, Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of WeTransfer and WePresent, to share their thoughts, insights, and forecasts for the year ahead and what governments, entrepreneurship, and investors need to prioritize. Welcome, both of you. Very happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Likewise, happy to be here, Ali.
Perfect. So I'm just going to jump right in just because we have a short period of time. So my first question is going to go to both of you. As we look at 2021, what are some of the most promising technological developments that lie the road ahead? And do you think that your answer would have been different if I've asked you this question 14 months ago, prior to COVID? So you can start, Div.
So,
I think you can.
Sure. And thank you, Ali. I'll take this and hand it over to Damian. To the latter part of your question, I think the answer would have been similar for some of the tech, and the pace at which the adoption takes place would have been different. I think as we look at 2021 and ahead, in terms of technological developments, I'd say everything as a service has become kind of obvious, where now as a service you can get software, platforms, equipment, delivery, automation, and just about everything else that is not provided as a service. If you can think of a business model and provide it as a service, it's something that the consumer wants more and more of. The trend towards renting versus owning is now rapidly increasing, and with COVID, I think that has increased even further and applies to pretty much everything. I think the adoption pace, obviously, to the point that you made in the introduction itself, today technology adoption in the last 12 months has seen a very, very rapid pace, and that will only continue to improve and increase, where we'll see more and more businesses adopt a lot more tech to enable or improve their businesses. I think location independence has become important, where operations now can be done from anywhere, and it's not just can be, it's a fundamental change in thinking that needs to be brought about to support this new version of life, because now we've seen it, we've all felt it and tasted it for the last several months, and there are parts of it that we've loved and we want to have for the rest of our lives. I think 5G and improved connectivity, including satellite internet, there is something that is really important, and it's something that all governments should focus on, because the faster you can adopt and implement, the greater the edge that you'll create for your local marketplace and also be more globally competitive. I think AI and big data continue to be important, and that will continue to improve automation, decision making, and efficiencies. I think the partial automation that you can get, an efficiency gain that you can get from robotic process automation and industrial automation will continue to improve. And I think 2020 and 2021 has kind of accelerated that. Adoption of various other things like IoT or VR, AR, or telehealth, or remote working, video conferencing, they're now a lot more reality than not. Because a lot of us for healthcare that would have never done telemedicine or that would have never experienced it, have experienced it for someone, for either ourselves or someone that we know well. So I think the adoption of that definitely has increased. I think improvement in logistics, and that goes for reliability, costs, predictability, all of that has become more important. To your, again, point that you made in the introduction, online education and e-learning is become a lot more important today. And it's, as governments think about it, how do we adapt and adopt to this online education? How do we increase the acceptability of it? How do we use it to decrease costs further and make it more widely available? All of that is a lot more possible now, and that is makes for interesting opportunities. The electric evolution is here, and in autonomous everything is going to be something that will happen within the next decade. But again, COVID, I think, has advanced and made the pace of it faster.
Perfect.
Damian, over to you.
There's nothing left to cover.
I'm sure from your expertise and your there is something you can add into the conversation.
I mean, we've seen so much change that we could never have predicted, 12 months ago. I think in the world of social media, we've fast-tracked through an awful lot of change that we've been looking for, I think, for the last 5 years, that very quickly came about over the course of the last 12 months, which I think, from the point of view of regulation and control and, removing some of those gatekeepers, I think has been incredibly important work. And luckily, through the situation we've been thrown into, have been fast-tracked. I think, we've seen phenomenal changes when it comes to even, the way that we transact and looking at currencies and in the development of things like tokens. NFT, wasn't really a thing pre-COVID. It was a toy that was experimented on with a few people, but suddenly it's fast-tracked to a place where I think, because our lives have become digital, the idea of digital currency and the idea of alternative currency has become so much more commonplace and a common part of conversation that I don't think we could have imagined it moving at the pace that it did. That Bitcoin could get to a place of being upwards of $50,000 dollars. That was unimaginable. But I think the gatekeeper part for me is one of the most interesting changes that we've seen, where somebody mentioned, I think it was Benedict Evans mentioned, that because there was no gambling happening, because there was no sports betting happening, the market moved to the stock market and used that as the place to experiment. And that's led to a phenomenal change too, that I think we're just beginning to see the start points of a new way of people dealing with money and changing money and changing money through different hands. None of this would have been as fast or as prominent a part of our conversation were it not for COVID. And that's certainly something that wasn't on our radar in the slightest. Of course, it's been quite dramatic from a negative point of view in terms of number of deaths and the devastation it's had, on business and small business and everything else that we're really yet to see the true impact of. However, I do think that there will be some changes that we'll see that I think will be, for the good, and particularly, in my opinion, around social media and the role that government will play in the regulation of social media. I think is something positive to come out of the last 12 months.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Damian. And yes, just to add to your point about the stock market, and to be honest, we've seen even here in the UAE that a big number of the younger generation are trying to invest in the stock market and trying to understand how it works. And, they're taking upon themselves to be bold enough to take such an opportunity where, as you said, prior to COVID, maybe that would not have been the case. Thank you so much for your answer onto our first question for today's session. Div, this question is directed to you. Do you think that the current economic depression is a threat or an opportunity for innovation? And honestly, what can be done to empower innovators and entrepreneurs through these difficult times from your perspective?
So I think as an entrepreneur, change is always positive, no matter what it is, whether it's negative change or positive change, because change means there's a disruption in what was always happening, which allows for newer possibilities to be monetized in some form. So as an entrepreneur, I would say that any change, and especially rapid change, means that whoever were the set of companies that were used to doing something in a certain way, those markets become more available than they were before. So all the changes that we just spoke about in terms of development, I think each of those bring newer opportunities that can be tapped into. I think for entrepreneurs, it's always been a lot of the innovation and the adoption of innovation is more to do with the day-to-day execution than necessarily with the idea, because the idea from a broad standpoint kind of remains similar pace and doesn't change as rapidly. But the execution, the localization of it, I think changes. And what governments can do in this kind of time frame is just help build on to all the possible changes that are going to take place, right? How do you invest? As a government, you have to think about investing in the long term with a long-term horizon of where the private market can't play. So if you know that these type of technology changes that we spoke about are going to happen, as a government, figure out how to invest in increasing the pace of adopting something like, let's say, 5G. How do you change the policies or allow for policies to work from anywhere? Because a lot of governments may have policies that may constrain that in some form. So how do you open that up very quickly? How do you make everything process light? Because a lot of things are process heavy in the past. And as you adopt and improve e-government services and you build on top of it as a government, that helps entrepreneurs and small businesses and large businesses become more efficient in some form. How do you allow for newer business models and support the gig economy, for instance, as compared to holding back and thinking that, hey, I'm used to doing something in a certain way for the last 50 years. Let me continue that and continue to support that. I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, there needs to be the right balance. And as a government, how do you think about that right balance faster? How do you invest in digital infrastructure that may or may not exist currently in your country, and how do you improve upon it? Because a lot of these companies will require local storage, local data, local infrastructure to be able to support all of these kind of innovations. How do you improve the acceptance of something like e-learning? How do you improve data laws and allow for more sharing of data and monetization of data in a form that is beneficial to the users as compared to where it can be used negatively in some form? So I think there are a lot of things that governments can do. One of the immediate things, obviously, is depending on which government, several governments have been able to provide a massive financial stimulus. And that financial stimulus, to an earlier point that was made here, has increased stock prices and created some asset bubbles. But you can't look at that short-term bit and stop doing it in any form, because at the end of the day, the real issues are going to come about in the next 6 to 12 months. And so that stimulus from the government and that help from the government in terms of figuring out how to defer payments, how to keep the interest rates low, how to do that for the longer term until we're kind of out of this mess is extremely important. And that essentially is some set of ideas around how the governments can think about possibly helping out in helping come out of this potential recession or potential depression faster.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Div, for answering that question. My next question is for Damian. So basically, with during 2020, the world suddenly shifted to online, and I believe all of us would like to understand is what role did WeTransfer play during this time? And I'm sure you will provide us with great insight in terms of what happened once the pandemic hit in terms of WeTransfer.
Well, I mean, we've always been there, right? So, I mean, for 10 years, we've been, supporting the creative industry and people that not only need to send files, but also need to make presentations through tools like Paste and Paper that we have. But we saw a big shift. So, I mean, like most people that are providing, web tools or particularly collaboration tools, we saw at the beginning of the pandemic a big shift to more people obviously using our products. I have to say, during the course of the last year, we've seen it sort of level out. So it hasn't been a continual, rise in usage as more and more people came online. We have 70 million plus users that use the service, every month. So we have a pretty good steady base. But what we definitely did see is an awful lot of people reaching out and asking for help. So I mean, we give away 30% of our media space to support different causes. And during the pandemic, we dedicated something like 500 million impressions to those creatives that unfortunately were hampered, jeopardized, really in financial difficulties because of their inability to be able to get work and get work done. And that was really, really evident across our user base, that we could see an awful lot of smaller businesses, an awful lot of freelancers that weren't able to get the commitments they were having previously prior to COVID. And that's where we tried to step in. We have another product called WePresent, which is a really long form media platform for particularly the creative community. And we saw a ton of new usage basically coming to that platform for inspiration. People looking for stories of how to work through the pandemic, where to find inspiration, how to find some positivity, some glimmers of hope. I think that people were looking for in what was, for many of us, quite a depressing period that for a lot of us we're still not out of. So we're hopeful that over the course of the next 6 months things get a little bit lighter.
Hopefully. Thank you so much for that, Damian. So my next question is to both of you. So as we all understand, like 2020 disrupted all of us in terms of the way we work, and with many of us had to work from home. What implications does this have on investing in startups? As previously, physical meetings were really key. And what I would like to know is, what are your thoughts on this? Would it have a major impact on startups securing investments? As before, the startups will be able to show on to their investors their own energy and passion. And do you think that, and also their idea, do you think that will have an implication on startups? So, I mean, what do you think? I'm just we're with you, Damian. What do you think about that?
So for sure, it has an implication, right? There's always an impact. However, there is a lot of money in the market still, right? There's an awful lot of money that, certainly in Northern Europe where I am, there are negative interest rates. So there is, an awful lot of people out there that actively are looking to invest their money because they're not getting any interest from the banks. So there's still a lot of money in the market. I think, if you are in the doing anything digital that's anything to do with collaboration or anything basically to do with building an online community, I think there's a ton of interest right now. I definitely don't see any of that waning in the near future. I also think that for an awful lot of startups, they don't necessarily feel very comfortable getting in front of a room, in front of a ton of bankers and pretending face to face. So this can be a blessing that you can hide behind a screen and spend your time on an amazing presentation deck and have 2 or 3 of you behind a video call, being able to rehearse, have speaker notes in front of you, being able to pitch, perhaps like you weren't able to pitch previously. So, glass half full, I think there's a ton of upside for people to actually be able to, pitch and invest at the moment. You just got to make sure you're doing it differently. I think, one of the things that's a challenge is right now, there's obviously a certain amount of, lethargy and a lack of appetite for people getting behind a Zoom meeting again. So you got to try and make sure that you're making that part interesting. But again, we're seeing the rise of tools like that are, real challenger tools to Zoom to make this sort of experience as interactive and as fun as you possibly can.
Perfect. Thank you, Damian. Div, from your perspective?
I think I think physical meetings are important. They're important to build trust, especially for investments. I think everybody that is investing is managing risk in some form. And then because of that, my view is, if I look at the ecosystem overall, it has a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot more money there. There's a lot of cash on the sidelines that has been chasing a lot of investments. But if you look at the investments that it's chasing, the investments from proven entrepreneurs, from proven teams, from proven brands, from proven and existing ideas. I think not being able to meet physically definitely makes it harder for newer founders and newer teams without a track record. And I've got that feedback from folks that I've spoken to in the industry, where because there's a lot more money chasing, a lot fewer entrepreneurs and a lot fewer ideas, I think we're also seeing an asset bubble in those kind of assets, where everyone wants to invest in something that they feel safe about and in something that they have trust for. And it has no reality in the actual financial performance of the business that you are necessarily investing in. So you're seeing that temporarily there might be a higher demand for these type of assets, and the price justification for certain things may be harder to do. But I think as soon as the world opens, in which I think it will very soon, definitely, in the very near future is my feeling. And I think as soon as that happens and physical meetings are possible again, I think physical meetings are important for that initial bit. And obviously the crazy adoption of technology and video conferencing now becoming normal, right? There are a lot of folks that would never go on it, even though all of us had that equipment in our office. Now everybody does. And my mom can get on Zoom. So I think to keep and maintain relationships, I think video conferencing is great. But to build them and to build trust initially, I think a lot of physical meetings, and might not just be formal meetings, also things like events and conferences where you're casually meeting people and building trust over a longer period of time. I think that is very important. And those that have been missing out on it, I think have been at a disadvantage, and hopefully that changes soon so that everybody gets that right opportunity.
Perfect, thank you. Since I have you here with me, Div, I just wanted to highlight upon the same sort of area. Because pre-COVID, you said that you were going to switch from a passive to an active investor. So what I would like to know, and our audience would like to know, is what has COVID done to your investment strategy? And will 2021 be a year that accelerates these investments? And what advice would you give to investors from your side?
So, to your point, Ali, I've been running my family office for the last 12 years, but mostly passively, because I've always also actively run an operating business. As a more active investor for the last year and a half, what I've seen is pre-COVID, we were doing things differently as compared to post-COVID, because I think the opportunity set has changed. Our time horizon has become more short-term and opportunistic in many ways, where when COVID hit, there were many businesses that we were able to buy during a shorter period of time at prices that were impossible to get, and we took advantage of that. I think one of the other things today, if I look at fixed income in the public space, one of the things that we realized is at this point of time that at least our feeling is that the risk is too high now for the return that one is getting. So which means that we need to move more and more into equities. And at this point, again, just to my previous question, our investments have been more focused on proven brands that are looking to do something bigger in the near term, as compared to taking a much higher risk on things and direct investments that we have done in the past. But today, because we're limited by being able to physically meet people and validate and verify a bunch of other things that we would have been able to do generally, I think that has decreased and has become slower. And I think that that's the case for a lot of folks that are investing.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dev, for all of that insight that you have. I'm sure everyone's getting, agrees with what you have said. Damian, my question is to you. As you are the Chief Creative Officer of WeTransfer, do you think post the pandemic we will see a change in the way creativity is facilitated in organizations? And what new trends do you expect us to see in the coming decade? People, they see investing in creative, such as something that you do when you have lots of money, as sort of philanthropy, and not something that you do when you make money. Do you agree with this as a notion?
No, not in the slightest. So I think we see ourselves very much in the same vein as a company like Apple. I think that Apple invested heavily in the creative class when they came out with the iPod, with the first Apple Mac, and then throughout the history of Apple product development, it's always focused on the creators. But that doesn't mean that it's not for everybody, right? It's just they're the sort of easiest audience to go after, who are, I think, the most receptive and the most responsive to those sort of products or tools. And we're following a very similar sort of path, that we're trying to make sure that our products are relevant to them, because they're almost the hardest to please. So if we can get the products and we can get them interested in the stuff that we're doing, then it almost makes it so much easier to get to the rest of the world. I think creativity is super important, particularly during something like COVID. We desperately need to be able to distract ourselves with something else, to be able to lose ourselves in whatever it may be, a film, a piece of music, a theatrical production, be it online or offline. And I think it's critical for society in general. What we've clearly seen is the differentiation between good creatives and phenomenal artists. And during COVID, it was a real test for those artists to be able to really produce work on their own without access to tons of producers and executives and studios and all the rest of it. And those who were able to really produce amazing work during a lockdown on their own in a room with just a keyboard are the artists of the next generation. And I think from this period, that's what we're going to see, is the people that excelled over the last 12 months will be the people that will really excel over the next 5 to 10 years.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Great insights from both of you. It has been a great pleasure having you both on this session, really. So thanks again. And back to you, World Government Summit and the team. We're ending our session for now. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers for such an engaging discussion on the future of entrepreneurship and the opportunities that are available in business today